The Man from Rock Bottom by Stephen Eric Johnson. Dedication. To my parents, my siblings, and my friends. If you don't know who you are, please ask. For enduring long. Acknowledgements, with thanks to the hard-working folks at Richter Publishing. Chapter 0. As above, so below. As below, so above. Location en route to Earth. Pan-Galactic Republic flagship questing. Perspective, Garfilet, Master of the Ministry of Defense. With a scarred face nearly without the capacity for expression anymore, Garfilet shifted his gaze between the various screens of the ship's command center. A assorted crew went about their duties in a state of perpetually controlled chaos, all around the central gradine on which he stood. On his immediate left was a view of what lay behind the ship. The freshly installed solar energy collector and microwave transmitter visibly humming, as it sent streams of nigh unlimited energy off toward the power-thirsty planets of this sparsely inhabited solar system. To his right, however, was the ship's destination, a small planet, dark and pulsing with unnatural life, save for a single shining point along its equator. This shimmer was the last city on Earth, the city made for humanity, because of the efforts of their would-be savior, the one master of the ministries who dared to believe in them, who felt that they were worth saving. That master, however, was not Garfilet. The essence of humanity is weakness, Garfi declared in his calm, deep, resonant voice. If they are not afraid, they are angry, and still afraid. And if they are not angry, they are arrogant, and angry, and afraid. Of course, as the master of the Ministry of Defense, Garfi spoke with the voice of experience. Ages past, he'd been created by the gene forgers of the Tarig species, one of their many living constructs, creatures designed and fielded when that ancient, terrible race of conquerors couldn't be bothered to deal with situations themselves. He knew how to take the measure of an opponent at a heartbeat, and humanity had only been the latest of so many opponents, now past. The Tarig and their all-encompassing empire were also past, of course, long ago destroyed through a combination of their own internal strife and the enthusiastic efforts of the freedom fighters and resistance forces that rose from their former subjects. Still, some of their creations lingered, Garfi among them, doing his best to serve the Pan-Galactic Republic that had sprung up from the unity and idealism of those formerly subject species, doing his best to somehow achieve atonement for his many sins as a war slave of the Tarig Empire, bringing peace out of war whenever it was possible. With the humans, though, Garfi didn't think peace was possible, not after what they'd done. Best to leave them, either to find their own light or to die, lost in the dark. What little expression was left to the patchwork man's face showed his fear as he turned his head. Fear for the small, soft-furred, gracile biped standing next to him. Please don't go down there, Sin, Garfi begged, his old eyes showing all the horror of 10,000 years engaged in the cruel business of waging war. They'll kill you. His eyes shifted past his friend, back to the benighted planet that was their destination. And then they'll die too. At first, Garfy thought his little friend hadn't heard, or simply wasn't going to answer. He knew the law of silence, however, and contented himself with it a while. Their ship progressed ever nearer to the human homeworld. Finally, Scintillant Camor, master of the Ministry of Life, spoke. One of the most long-running and successful governments of Earth's past made use of a philosophy called legalism, began the purple-furred Ledre, in a voice soft as down-fluffed and sweet as new-picked wineberries. Its tenets for managing a population can be summed up thusly. Punishment produces force. Force produces strength. Strength produces awe. Awe produces virtue. Thus, virtue has its origins in punishment. Scintillant shook his head, the quirk of his long, delicate muzzle and softly glowing eyes conveying ultimate pity, ultimate compassion. Can you imagine growing up under generations of such a philosophy, Garfy? His eyes flicked to the patchwork man's face, his expression turning wry. No, you don't have to imagine. You were there, right at the beginning. Compared to you, I'm just an infant, and my sorrow almost as uninformed. Despite his words, however, the delicate-seeming biped's jaw set, his eyes turning forward, peering toward the benighted little world that had been covered in so much light less than a human generation ago. Most of history is driven by the actions of a few individuals, he said at last. Most people just want to be, while great powers clash above their heads. Humanity hasn't had a fair chance for their heroes to really shine. Villains are far more reliable. Now they're going to get that chance. With the power station set up, Sunflower City is ready to bloom in earnest. I got 4 of the finest peacekeeper veterans in the entire Pan-Galactic Republic, each dividing up the city into districts of command and gathering the best and most merciful that humanity has to offer for training in the fine art of keeping the Republic's peace. One of them is Sergeant Benjuro Klee, he added, casting a sidelong glance at his old friend, smirking a little at the subtle signs of shock of recognition and admiration on the other male's face. There's Dr. Salvi for management and distribution of life essentials, of course, Gret to cover auditing, and the professor has his classes on Republic cultural integration. Garfy couldn't help but let the faintest smirk of his own touch his inflexible lips at the brief pause. You can't pronounce his name either, huh? Then his expression hardened. Earth has had a link connection for almost a local year now. Oh, Sin, when you started gathering humans to live in that city of yours, that class teaches the bare minimum that anybody needs to know to join the Pan-Galactic Republic properly, and only 1 human has signed up so far. 1. Up until now, Sunflower City's mostly just been populated by humanity's old leadership, along with their staff, Scintillant answered dismissively, the ones who got them into their present mess. Gathering them up first was essential to getting any work done. They're contained now, set up in nice places to live, and out of the positions where they can do any more damage. And consider which human it was who signed up. The man. Despite his skepticism, Garfield gave the slightest grunt of acknowledgement, but not surprise, at this revelation. Of course, if anybody signed up, it would be the man. Right now, we've got the peacekeepers and your citizen mercenaries working full-time to bring in boatloads of refugees from the rest of the planet, Scintillant continued, and Salvi and Gret are working overtime with the city's central computer system, and any native humans they can get on board to get them settled into proper housing with necessary resources, food and water, safety, education, and recreational facilities. We've got all the pieces in place now, Garfy. Everyone all working together to help lead humanity into the light. Maybe for the first time ever. And we have to succeed here, Garfy. The look on the little Ladre's face as he said these words made the strings of Garfy's multiple hearts twinge. If we can't save humanity, even if it's from themselves, what's the point of our entire way of life? What we're doing here is the whole purpose of the Pan-Galactic Republic being created in the first place, playing out in miniature. Maybe, said the Patchwork Man, shaking his head, obviously unconvinced. Maybe not. Think about this, Sin. Every sapient species, somewhere in their religions, has some mythology built up around a Messiah, someone who'll save them from their sins. Out of all those tens of thousands of different cultures, each with their own ideal savior, humanity's the only one that killed theirs. Repeatedly. He sighed, his eyes turning down. I'm serious, Sin. You fail here, and nobody will pick things up. This is the last chance this planet gets. Squaring his shoulders as he drew himself up to his not considerable full height, Sentinel Camor looked toward the shining city as it filled the screen. Then I guess we just won't fail. Location, Earth. Sunflower City, main aquatic loading dock. Perspective, Baraka Das. So close, packed in so tight, it was almost impossible to breathe. With knuckles as drained of color as her cheeks, Baraka Das gripped the frail of the flat-bottomed watercraft, praying to whatever gods might be listening to end this trial soon. Behind her, she could hear the cacophony of humanity, a multilingual melange of profanity, threats, curses, crying babies, wailing children, groans of the elderly, and there, behind it all, the sound of her own family, coarse and cruel. The marriage had been arranged, of course, because her parents were poor, but had a good name and lineage. Her betrothed came from a family of the lowest orders, but had more than enough money to buy their way into the world, up in the world. Now, though, none of that mattered, not after the end had taken away everything so many years ago. Everything, that is, but her personal, private hell. Fortunately, everyone was packed in too tight to do more than cast threats, most people too seasick even for that. Even more fortunately, most of the passengers of this little craft were children, which further lessened the overall hostility. Most fortunately of all, even as she cast her eyes up from where she just finished feeding the fish, Baraka's view was filled with the brilliance of the great city, their salvation. Bright as a star fallen to earth, as a jewel pulled up from the deepest depths and polished to perfection by a maker more than human, glorious and full of promise. The promise of an end to the end. Clunk! The impact shook them all, and then suddenly, blissfully, the rocking of the waves came to a complete and utter stop as one of the loading mechanisms hoisted the two small craft right up onto the dock. The great doors at the far end of the boat dropped with a reverberating clang, revealing the glorious entrance to the city across the docks. Everyone surged forward, jostling and shoving and working their elbows to get to the front, to head straight toward the great glowing gates, where it was said anybody could register as a citizen of the Pan-Galactic Republic, receive a place to stay and food to eat, all for free. Of course, after the horrors of the end, atrocities inflicted by humans on humans, nobody really believed that anything was free. There was always a catch. compared, though, to what waited on the other side of the waters dividing the great shining city from the shadows of the endless night that had once been Earth. No, there was no comparison, and no price too high. Even so, as everyone else disembarked, Baraka hung back, waiting, watching. Perhaps it was because she was still recovering from seasickness. Perhaps she just didn't relish the thought of rejoining her family, her mother-in-law and husband and their hangers-on. Whatever the reason, she stayed where she was, letting the shadows of the boat's pilot house cover her, hiding her from sight, from memory. Instead, she let her eyes follow the milling crowd of children walking uncertainly toward the entry gates to the city, feeling a softness inside of her that she'd forgotten for far too long. These children would never face the same horrors that she had endured. They would never... Suddenly her breath caught, and Baraka froze as two vast, dangerous-looking figures stepped from the pilot house. Framed in the light of the city, Baraka could make them out quite clearly. One was a small humanoid, gilled and finned, seated inside a giant plastic bubble, which itself was attached to immense robotic arms and legs. The other, meanwhile, was a creature as tall as the tallest humans, but with a body as broad in the shoulders as it was tall, with skin made of shale-like scales, and a face composed of transparent gel, in which a sphere of electricity sparked and jolted. "Human-made garbage," growled the second alien, as it kicked the inner hull of the little landing craft. Its words formed from the sound of lightning striking the inside of its gelatinous head parts. "How do they survive such conditions?" "But they did survive," came the reply of the being in the bubble robot, its voice a sweet, high tenor. And as it spoke, Baraka realized she could understand them. She'd heard of the translation filters that Republic personnel often implanted into their bodies or hid in their clothes, where they couldn't be seen, and wondered if this was how this marvel was made possible. We owe them that much respect. "Yes, that much," the stone-scaled creature admitted with a soft grunt. "Pity we mercs won't be around for long. I don't think these humans are ready to accept peace just yet, not even after all they've endured. But Master Let wants us out, to give the experts a chance to make this mess work. What can you do?" "Nothing," admitted the one with the mellifluous voice. "Not without making things worse, anyway. We simply must trust that..." The pair cut off their conversation sharply, both of them turning to look at the assembled humanity gathered below the lights of the city gates. Baraka looked too, and couldn't quite stifle the deep, despairing groan that what she saw coaxed from her innermost parts. Striding into the middle of the crowd of the recently disembarked in the unloading area was a man, tall and thin, dressed in the robes of a priest, though it was hard at that distance to see what sect he represented. Nevertheless, Baraka knew what was coming next, a scene she'd already endured far too many times among the communities of humanity. That was a preacher man, and soon he was going to start preaching, and then everything would go to hell. "My brothers, my sisters," rose the preacher man's voice, "my brothers and sisters of humanity, of the rich, pure soil of our dear earth, how long are we to suffer these unholy and these impure elements? How long are we to prostitute ourselves to the alien and the invader?" He strode to the fore of the line of citizen aspirants, and everyone with sense quailed and fell back, not wanting to draw the ire of the preacher man, and the mob that was even then starting to form in earnest all around. They'd all been raised on the words of the traveling preacher men, the lone sources of humanity's cultural unity during the end, and to listen to one too long was to feel your mind go fuzzy, your heart inflame. And soon the murmur of the crowd's discontent bound them, from a mass of individuals into a single, outrage-roused whole. Only Baraka remained unmoved, her and the children. They, because they were too innocent for the complexities of the hate-filled gospel of a preacher man. She, because the scene was all too familiar. "By the word of God Almighty, we will not be made slaves nor whores," railed the preacher man, his arms raised high, the cries of the crowd around him rising higher still. As the two Republic soldiers raced from the deck of the boat, and other figures joined them from all sides, acting fast to quell the mob before it got out of hand, Baraka's attention turned away from the preacher man's words. Instead, she looked toward the knot of children that had been making their way toward the gates. Now they were surrounded by shadow-shrouded humans, clad in black, bearing guns. Cowering, fearful, they were being led away into the darkness of the bottommost level of the city, away from the gates, away from safety. For them, salvation was lost. Now that she was looking into the darkness, Baraka could see other craft, small transports like hers, fishing boats, even little rubber rafts. Some came into one of the legitimate docks, the well-lit places where others who wanted to join the Republic were meant to land. Others went into the darkness, the places where even the light of the city's heaven-thrust spires couldn't quite reach. Darkness sank into Baraka's heart as well, as she stepped off the boat's gangplank, then turned away from the great glowing gates, and began to walk along the shore. Made of shaped rock, she saw that the edges of the artificial island on which Sunflower City had been built looked almost natural. Perhaps in time and with the lashing of waves, they'd even become fully natural-looking beaches, as rock yielded to tide. Trees rose up around her, and sweet, fragrant flowers, and before she knew it, Baraka was walking in a fairy forest, a place that was so perfect, so wonderful, it couldn't possibly have been real. There were even the sounds of bird song. Birds! She hadn't heard birds in years. And now she was hearing songbirds in the dark of night, on the island of a city built by aliens to house the remnants of humanity, plucked from the jaws of doom. Unable to resist, Baraka followed her ears, her eyes lifting, moonlight catching the flitting forms of little passerines. They were soon joined by the corvids, raptors, avians of both the night and the day. The birds weren't alone either. Alongside them flew other shapes, leather-winged and sharp-voiced, the night flyers and the day flyers, sharing the same space without conflict. Then she stepped out into a clearing at the base of a moon-dappled, grassy knoll. Looking up, she saw what was drawing the birds and the bats. There, seated at the top of the hill, was a funny little man, dressed in a full-body, baggy-looking suit, complete with a rounded helmet shaped something like a bucket. A strange patchwork quilt of a map was laid out before him. Unable to help herself, Baraka drew closer, and saw that the short, slightly pudgy little man's garb looked like a very old, very faded hazmat suit, something like what had once been worn by world militaries when they'd had to operate in contaminated areas. Before there was anything but contaminated areas, of course. Except this suit was ill-fitting, and the man himself cut an odd figure, making him look something like a clown, but without the grease paint creepiness. This little man was harmless. That was something Baraka could feel deep inside herself. However, his companions were anything but. Just as she neared the top of the crest, Baraka came up short with a soft, fearful gasp. From one side of the man came a vast shape, broad wings outstretched like thunderheads, a sharp, wicked hiss of fury filling the night. Moments later, a second of the darkling beasts stepped up from the other side, a low, crouching figure on all fours, its muzzle sharp, its gleaming teeth sharper as it growled, low and menacing. Just moments before the creatures leapt, and Baraka was doomed, the little man's head turned slightly, his hand lifted. That gesture was enough, and instantly the two creatures pulled back into the glow of the camplight, by which he was making notes on his overly complicated map. Revealed by that light, Baraka could see at once that what she thought were monsters were only a swan and a big fluffy dog. The swan studiously ignored her as it waddled away. The dog, on the other hand, gave her a sheepish grin and wag of its tail. "Hey-o," said the plump little man, rising slowly, gingerly to his feet as he turned to face Baraka. As he stood, the light of his lamp falling on him fully, Baraka saw with a start why the animals around him had been so protective. There was a wide half-oval, tinged in darkening crimson, dotted across his body from hip to shoulder, front and back. Bite marks. The mystery of how he'd survived such a bite was at least partially revealed, however, by the strange armor plates visible through the holes in the hazmat suit. They pulsed like something alive, glistening wetly, and as she watched, extended tiny tendrils that were already hard at work sealing up the tears in the heavily faded beige-yellow of the man's suit. "Black widow shark," he said by way of explanation, seeing her wide-eyed concern. Then, dismissing it as though such an encounter were commonplace. He'd faced one of the monsters of the wasted lands, and... "You're still alive," she almost whispered. "Yeah," he admitted with a shrug, his helmeted head turning away, bashfully avoiding her gaze, even as he sank back down, worn out. Not much choice. Following the line of his softly glowing visor, Baraka blinked. Curled up right next to the camp-light were two children, brother and sister, judging from their family resemblance. An assortment of critters were cuddled up close beside them, as though in a family-friendly animated feature. The story of what had to have happened flooded into Baraka's mind. Black widow sharks were one of the many monsters of the end, and like all monsters, they were creatures made to hunt, kill, and most of all, terrorize humanity, keeping the humans disorganized and easily dominated by those with power. The few survivors of their attacks described their tactics with shuddering horror. They would snatch people who wandered too close to the water, drag them down, and surround them in mucus-encased bubbles. Then the horrible midnight-skinned monsters would circle their struggling, helpless, doomed captives, letting them panic, and in their panic use up what little air they had just that much faster. Finally, just at the moment when the air was about to run out, just when fear had seasoned their meat to perfection, the creature, part shark, part crustacean, part freak of nightmares, would strike. To have taken two children back from a black widow shark, this cute, short, plump, utterly unassuming little man in the silly, ill-fitting outfit, had to have gone into the water, into the dark, right into the lair of the beast, and won. "You can call me Araquan," said the funny little man, who Baraka was starting to realize wasn't nearly as funny or harmless as she'd initially thought. "Baraka Das," she answered, holding out her hand. Instead of taking it, he put a slender, bright orange hardcover book into her grip instead. A copy of Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot. A real paper book. "I read it to them until they fell asleep," he explained. And though the softly glowing visor hid his eyes from view, she somehow got the impression that he was smiling at her, gentle and shy. "Then I took away the last bad dreams." He paused when he saw her confused expression. "It's something empaths can do," he explained, "to help people heal. Siddlant Kamor, my mentor, taught me, but, well..." She heard the sound of him clearing his throat, his voice growing slightly husky. "The nightmares have to go somewhere. It's okay, though. I've got plenty already. What's a few more, give or take? So," he cocked his head to one side, conveying so much in body language for someone without a visible face, "what brings you out here, Miss Baraka Das? Shouldn't you be at the gates to Sunflower City, getting registered? Getting somewhere safe to sleep, with good food to eat and safe water to drink? Somewhere far away from rock bottom, he added, motioning toward the lowest level of the city, where the light of its gleaming spires didn't quite reach. You only go there if you don't have anywhere else. She began, her own voice almost as husky as his, thick with emotion, then started again. I just couldn't. Her eyes met the man's visor, which seemed to soften with compassion. Impossible, of course, since it was just metal and plastic. Still, the impression remained. People who hurt you are waiting back there, he said, a statement more than a question. She nodded. You don't know how to leave them, he added. She nodded again. Nowhere to go, no power, no choice, no safety. So you left them, wandered out here, not caring where you went. And found you, she finished, her free hand resting on the head of the immense fluffy dog, a smile coming to her face as it leaned into her touch, looking up at her with endearing amber eyes. Well, sighed the man, leaning back on his hands as he continued to sit on the soft green grass, maybe you can do something for me, and in the process you can do something for you as well. She didn't object, so he continued. First, do you want to be a citizen of the Republic? I suppose, Berica replied with a shrug of her own. There aren't that many other good options for me right now. Is that good enough, Central? Araquan asked the empty air. A moment later, a glowing, friendly blue rectangle materialized between them. Good enough for government work, Igor, said the round-edged rectangle in a pleasantly neutral, slightly feminine-sounding voice. Or is it Araquan now? Araquan, if you please, replied the man, who then motioned between Berica and the hovering construct. Miss Berica Das, meet the City Central computer system, or just Central. They, Central doesn't exactly have a gender, is the guiding intelligence behind all of Sunflower City's operations. They keep tabs on everyone and everything within their sensor range, all part of fulfilling their primary mission. Serving the people of this city, Central finished. That is my one concern, my sole objective, my purpose. You do not need to fear me, Miss Das. I am not a person, and so I do not experience the frailties of people, or their corruption. I do not get bored. I do not require sleep. I am incapable of experiencing spite, or anger, or sorrow. I experience some very basic emotions, such as satisfaction in a job well done, but they are unable to interfere with my functions, nor can they bias me in serving the people under my protection. As a new citizen of the Pan-Galactic Republic, that now includes you. And also these kids, added the man, slowly, painfully, getting to his feet, picking up his tatterdemalion map as he rose and slowly, carefully folded it, before packing it into a pouch above his thigh. I had them swear in like you before they went down for their naps. They need to be taken somewhere safe, and the education center is as good a place as any. Central, can you take Miss Berica Das there? I can, and I will, replied the computer construct, as a glowing blue line appeared on the grass. Just follow the guideline as soon as you are ready. With that, the solid light construct burst into a shower of pixels. The blue line, however, remained. If you want to save yourself, Miss Berica Das, said the man, gently shaking first one and then the other child, until they began to stir into wakefulness, while all around them the animals began to slip silently into the dark. Go into the education center, hand over the kids, and tell whoever's at the front desk that you want to work. They'll give you an initial aptitude test, then they'll send you to your new home with some materials to study. Read whatever they give you, thoroughly, but don't worry too much about memorizing it. They just want to see how well you adapt to new ideas. Once you feel ready, go back and take the follow-up test. You should get a call for an interview soon after. If it's for a really good job, You'll meet with Sibilant Camor himself. I hear he's arriving in Sunflower City tonight." Before the two children had quite come fully awake, still on the edge of dreams, he snapped off the camp light and slipped it into another pouch, then began to limp his slow, careful way down the hill and into the deepening shade of the forest. "You can keep the book, Miss Barakadas," he said over his shoulder, before he vanished from sight. "Take care. Be safe." Blinking like the children, and like them, feeling as though she'd just come out of a dream, Baraka reached down, taking a small hand in each of hers, letting the boy, the older of the two, take the book. They'd liked it, after all, so they might as well keep it. "Well," she said with an air of determination, and took her first step along the guideline, which began to snake off toward the brightness of the city. "I suppose we'd better get going."